Everybody, isn't this exciting? Oh, yeah. So I'm Jess, I work with the Lighthouse team, and I am so delighted and so excited to be here to celebrate the publication of this marvelous book. At least this I know, by Andres and Ordorica. So I'm just going to say a few words about how the evening is going to progress. We'll have poems read out by two guest poets, and we'll have some of this marvelous work read out as well. And then Andres and I will have a wee chat on stage, and we'll invite audience questions as well. And then we'll finish with some more poems, and there'll be a signing at the end as well, so you can get your books signed. Myri, maybe somebody else, will be selling books at the back, and that's where Andres will be signing the books as well. Just a note on masks as well. So the bar has been open and will be open for a wee while afterwards during the signing. But if you can keep your masks on whenever you're not drinking as much as possible, that will be hugely appreciated, and we can just keep everyone as safe as possible. So I'm not going to say very much to begin with, and I think we want to plunge straight into the words. So a huge round of applause for Andres and Ordorica.
Hello, everyone. I'm using this mic because Carl adjusted to his height and I am not as tall. We're in Mexico, we're tall. Etzali wants us to say that very clearly, but we are not as tall as Scandinavians. I'm Andres. I'm going to perform one poem for you right now, and then we're going to get the night going. I'm so honored to have you all here. I want to say my thanks now. It's like, oh, I won an Oscar. I can't forget. I'm so grateful to be sharing today with you. Quick story. So I moved to Edinburgh almost 4 years ago. And the first event I attended with Lighthouse, I distinctly remember Mari saying that when my book came out, she wanted to do the book launch. And it was like a manifestation, and at that point, I didn't know what was gonna happen with my career, but I'm just so honored to be sharing space with you and with Lighthouse. I'm so grateful for Inc. for publishing my collection, for Heather and Laura, for taking a chance on it, for Rachel Plummer, who is an amazing editor. They did so much work to give me the courage to really just dive into these poems. So to them, I say thank you. To Holly, who did the cover design, and to Danny, who took my wonderful headshots. So those are my thank yous, and I'm gonna get going. This is Bottled Blue. I want to bottle blue, capture it in its breezy and effortless hue, take it with me on long journeys. I want that color to anoint me, wash me in Florida water like chrism on my baptism day, cradled in my father's arms over the font. That color follows me around like a phantom balloon whose helium never dies, long string tied to finger, a reminder. 29 years around the sun, and that color never gets old, even if I do, bright as ever and still moving. It lives in the sky, the sea, the mighty ocean. Blue can transport me back to happier times, can evoke feeling through memory, can transcend a lifetime. When you look up at the sky, untainted by clouds or rain, do you ever wonder why does blue mean sad? For me, it means renewal, it means rebirth. Blue is redemption. Yes, I long to bottle blue, keep it safe forever, until the day I need to share with you some happiness. Blue will be tied around my neck, wearing it like an amulet. I'll cross myself in its salvation. Blue, the holiest of colors. Thank you so much. I'm really chuffed with that. I'm not a spoken word artist. I do not memorize my own poems. I was gonna give you a treat. That's it. We're going for readings the rest of the night. I did my job. So, without further ado, our first poet of the evening is Carl Alexanderson. He is a queer spoken word poet and writer based in Edinburgh. He was selected for the BBC Words First program in 2021 and awarded the Unislam Slambassadors Award in 2020. His work has been published in the Wino, Ink, Sweat, and Tears, Impossible Archetype, and more. So without further ado, please help me welcome Carl Alexanderson to the stage.
Thanks so much for having me. I'll take this mic over here. So as Andres said, my name is Carl. I'm from Sweden, and thank you for that. Who over there? Oh, I see you. And I would like to say that I'm average height in Sweden. Anyway, so my first poem that I would like to share is called English. And I'm not sure if you can tell by my accent, but English is my second language. And English has a very interesting status in Sweden. And so I wrote this poem to kind of reflect on my own journey of learning English. At 6, I started learning English off of Pokemon cards. See, since Sweden is such a small country, they didn't really bother giving the cards Swedish translations. This innocent observation sparked a sense of mystery. Why are there letters here that I recognize but can't make sense now? It's fascinating, isn't it? At 6, I learned that the Swedish winner of Melodifestivalen is going to sing her song in English at the Eurovision Song Contest, even though she won with a song in Swedish. My parents say so that people will understand her, you know. But I understand her just fine. And so does everyone I know, and so the next year the winner song is in English from the get-go. It's about Las Vegas and neon lights, but that's about everything I get from it, yet no one seems to care about that. Early, I learned that in the grand scheme of things, Swedish doesn't matter. At 10, I learned that if you stay up long enough, you can watch Hannah Montana on Disney Channel in English, and that all the shows Mom watches are in English as she works out in front of the TV. It's a hidden world opening itself up to me. There are Swedish subtitles, so who cares, really? At 10, my older cousin is reading a book in English, and I'm confused as to why she didn't just buy the translated Swedish version like Mom always does. She says there wasn't one, and I nod. At 13, our school makes us pick a third language, Spanish, German, or French, but most people don't really bother. English is enough. As long as you got your English down, you're good. At 13, I read my first proper book in English. There wasn't a Swedish translation, I think. I actually didn't bother to check. At 18, I moved to California as an exchange student at a random high school which no one questions or challenges, only encourages. At the prep camp before, we are 450 students. 440 of us are going to English-speaking countries, 10 are going elsewhere. See, that sounds about right, doesn't it? At 18, I started writing poetry, but only ever in English. Swedish isn't good enough. At 21, I moved to the UK for my undergraduate degree in English language and literature. People ask me why, but really, how could I not? At 22, my grandpa, who doesn't speak a word of English, asked me to translate one of my poems for him into Swedish. And I almost say, no. Thank you. So this poem was originally meant to be a funny little poem about, oh, I learned Swedish from Pokemon cards. Isn't that so funny? And then it quickly became a bit less funny. But it really got me thinking about my Swedish identity and how for a lot of years before then I had kind of tried to not erase my Swedish identity, but I kind of didn't want anyone to know that I was Swedish in my poetry. And when I wrote this poem, I had a big wake-up call and started to reflect on that and bring in Swedish and Swedish words and center Sweden in my poems, and so for this next poem, you'll need some vocabulary. In Sweden, when you're talking about your grandparents, they each of the four grandparents have a separate word that's just for them based on their relationship to you. So rather than grandma or grandpa, there's four different ones. So my mom's mom would be mormor, mom's dad, morfar. My dad's mom is farmor, dad's dad, farfar. Mormor, morfar, farmor, farfar. Cool. That's all the vocabulary you need, I promise. Here's my next poem. It's titled Majas alfabetsånger. I am 5 singing songs about flowers. At school, there's both the CD and the book for Majas alfabetsånger, where there's a song for each letter of the alphabet about a flower whose name starts with each one. A. Ask. Jag har en ask, den är minst 100 år. Den blir bara högre ju mer tiden går. I remember loving how, technically, ask could mean both ash tree and tiny box, and I'd imagine both, 100 years on, how different they would have become with the ash tree still burst in spring or hesitate. The tiny box still kept close to one's chest. Mormor once gave me a tiny brass chest with a glass apple inside that I keep inside another wooden box that I made at school in 5th grade. Farmor and I used to take turns guarding a tiny wooden treasure chest lest farfar would pretend to steal it, neither of us able to contain the goodness in our chests, and I guess I wonder for how long I get to keep this. These boxes of memories that I store in my chest lest I forget where I put them. I find songs are a good way of remembering. The melody is a lit up pathway, the lyrics a wooden staircase. In my family, we are all hoarders, taking photos of everything, storing things for later. I remember the last time I climbed up into Morfar's attic. Nothing short of a tour of his chest, a testament to his existence. In 100 years, would you rather be an ash tree or a treasure chest? Burst or kept? Singing to the flowers or sung to rest? When we sold our house, I found my own copy of Majas alfabetsånger in the attic and was 5 years old again, singing the songs into my chest to keep the flowers within me alive. Och jag har en gunga på lägsta grenen. Där sitter jag ofta och dinglar med benen. In 100 years, I imagine myself on a swing, swaying from the lowest branch of an ash tree, singing myself to rest, knowing I'm kept in the chests of the people I knew who I treasured and treasured and treasured and treasured. Thank you. So a beautiful little segue to my third and final poem is that for Christmas last year, my partner bought me this ask, if you will, this tiny box made out of ash tree. So it's technically both in the same thing, to store birthday cards and anniversary cards and things like that. And so I wanted to end tonight with a queer poem about male love. It's titled These Hands. These hands, more often than not, are the sticks my brother would bring home from nursery pretending they were guns. But on my best days, these hands are able to hold cloudberries without having them blow away. And this is how men love each other. In my daydreams, men love like the fairy ring in the backyard of my childhood home, which, no matter the time of year or how many times my dad mows the lawn, is always unflinchingly there, holding us together, arm in arm. Thank you so much. Yeah, so that was my set. I'm so happy to be here. It's an absolute pleasure to be here tonight. So grateful to Andres for having me and to Ladus for organizing this entire event. I really hope you enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you so much.
Oh, God. We're going to survive. We will survive. He survived. All right. So next up, we have, I'm going to do my own intro before I give their intro. I am so honored to have this next poet here who is a very dear friend of mine, and I was realizing that one of the last in-person events I did was when they headlined Inky Fingers back in March 2020, before this virus came along. Actually, to be fair, we did know it was coming. And we were like, is this the last time we're gonna see each other? But without further ado, it is a great pleasure of mine to introduce Atsali Hernandez, who is a non-binary Latinx, queer, fierce, femme, poet, coder, DJ, no borders organizer, and social justice trainer. Their work has been published in Ascend magazine, We Were Always Here, a queer words anthology, and Ceremony from the Scottish BIPOC Writers Network. Etzali's first poetry pamphlet, From Murky Waters We Rise, is forthcoming with Forest Publications. So without further ado, please do help me welcome the great Atsali Hernandez.
Hello, thank you. I'm on the Mexican Giants mic. Thank you very much for having me, Andres. It's such a pleasure to be here. And Carl, thank you so much for sharing your poetry with us. I'm quite nervous, if you can notice. It's been a long time. Yeah, I'm just gonna go for it. A content warning throughout my set for death, gender-based violence, racism, ableism, incarceration, and homophobia. Seaside. While I sit at the beach, memories of you overwhelm me. Uncountable times that we spent playing in the warm sand, splashing the salty cold water. The sound of your laugh, the light of your eyes, the warmth of your hands, all of them frozen in time. There is a hollow place in my heart. I thought of filling it with sand and salty and seawater, a final and desperate attempt to capture your essence just once more, once more. I miss you, like the sea misses the full moon, implacable and unmeasurable, scorching the shores of my heart and every single hidden corner of my mind. This next one is called "A Not to All Men. Even though you didn't do it to me, I am wounded too". Hay raíces históricas en las que a la mujer se le estigmatizó, marginó, acalló, pero lo más grave en los últimos años es la impunidad. Rigoberta Menchú, 2017. I saw a man running late one night through the Hackney marches. I have been wondering ever since if he was scared too, if he instinctively let go of his partner's hand to look around and make sure they weren't being followed. If through his mind ran the fear of being violated, powering his survival mode. I saw a man hitting on my partner when we were grocery shopping. He kept greeting her in all the languages he knew and making signs to me to help him out. I wonder whether he knows how terrifying it is to having someone making advances on you when you have clearly shown no interest. I saw a man insisting on dancing with my friend on a night out, even out after she politely said no too many times. He followed her to the bar, trying to get her a drink, then to the dance floor by putting his hand on her waist when she was trying to move far away from him. I saw a man touching my vulva on public transport, laughing at me after I started hitting me, and simply walking away while everyone else stood there and did nothing. I quickly questioned myself. Am I wearing short clothes? Too much cleavage? Am I jeans too tight? Why I didn't go to the women-only carriage? I saw my best friend's ex-boyfriend waiting for her at the bus stop when she refused to let him drive her home after breaking up. He started stalking. She used to drive on her street at times, calling her house and mobile phone, asking her family to intercede for him because he was a good match. All while they were saying to her, él es libre de manejar por donde quiera. One day she disappeared without leaving a trace. The authorities did nothing because young women always ran away with their men, and because he had enough money and knew someone who knew someone to pay his way out of suspicion. I saw a man following one of my sisters when she was on her way to ballet classes from school. From the moment he laid eyes on her, he followed each of her movements. She was ringing the bell and knocking the door desperately while he was in the next building's entrance praying to his God for that door to not open. All my sister was thinking was whether she had something to defend herself if he tried to rape her. I saw a man showing his genitals to my neighbor and I when we were 14 while we were waiting for the bus to go to school. He poked her shoulder and asked if she had spare change, only for her to turn around and see his penis. We failed to react. All of a sudden, we were speechless, terrified, and frozen. I was for a long time grateful because he didn't do anything bad to us. I saw a man who claimed to be a dad filling up my mom's coworker toddler. She didn't go to nursery as he demanded to take care of her at home. I saw her change from a little happy person to someone who cried and was afraid to be left alone with men. When her mom realized damage had been done, both sides of the family told her, ¿vas a arruinar tu relación por algo de lo que no tienes pruebas? Es una chamaquita, ¿ella qué va a saber? A ti él nunca te ha lastimado. That little girl didn't have the words to describe what happened to her, other than she had been hurt by someone who was meant to take care of her, because in this white heteropatriarchal society, we are all born an unconditional parent. So when I say you have hurt me too, it's not a light statement, it is a fact. Thank you. This next one is called Forget Me Not. For you, being so unapologetically Black, queer, and trans is a synonym of terrorism and gender essentialism. Because we have been feeding white cis heteropatriarchal supremacy without a pause. We have been eroding any sense of humanity in the same way we have been pouring oil into the sea. In 2020, you passed away. We blame the virus and isolation without acknowledging that in the past this had already happened. Because the world was not created for people like you, my beloved friend. How can we forget that the Race Relations Act was signed in 1965 and the Disabilities Act in 1970? Decades later, everything remains the same. We have learned and discovered many things while ignoring most of them. Setting up new workhouses and sweatshops in the colonies, giving them local heroes' names to wash the homophobia and genocide away. An outstanding legacy of sodomy laws around the world since the 1860s, to then shame them for their closed minds and savagery from an indifferent pond. Somewhere in the present future, being like you, so unapologetically brown, black, queer, and trans is a synonym of happiness and freedom, love and acknowledgement. Thank you. One more to lighten the mood. Not very known for writing love poems, and this is one of my favorite, actually. Collision. I see you and I can't breathe. Your dreamy eyes take me somewhere else, a place that doesn't exist on earth. I have been told that so much perfection can only exist in your imagination. Your presence makes my blood boil, fireworks in my mind, flowers growing in my land, rain pouring non-stop, cherry trees blossoming in spring. You look at me and I shiver. The feel of your touch burns me like wood in a fire. I see celestial bodies and satellites in you, beams of light, heavily essent in the Milky Way, galaxies all over our heads. Thank you. This is my last poem, and this is from a series of poems that I'm working about my experience of immigration detention. Definitions for detention: holding back, the act of officially detaining someone, be kept in a school after hours, to stop, to withhold something, custody, confinement, lack of movement, punishment, barriers, anti-blackness, border control, inhumane, a haunting manor in Dungavel, Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was so beautiful. As half Swedish, half Colombian, I'm sort of like swapping back and forth. So now it's time to do a real introduction. I'm very aware that, you know, all of us are here to celebrate this wonderful collection. So most of you will already know who Andres is, but I still feel like it's very important to give a proper introduction and to celebrate all of your work, Andres. So I'm going to do a wee introduction. Andres Nicolas Ordorica is a queer Latinx writer based in Edinburgh. The grandson of Mexican immigrants, his writing often speaks for those who are from ni de aquí ni de allá. He is a recipient of the Edwin Morgan Trust Second Life Grant. In 2021, he was shortlisted for both the Morley Prize for Unpublished Writers of Colour and Mo Sichuaron Prize. He is the author of At Least This I Know. And now it's my great honor to introduce a whole set of poems from this collection from Andres. Welcome on stage.
All right. So the first set of poems I'm going to share with you tonight are all about family. He says this unsure. No, they're not all. Oh, yes, they are. Kevin is my husband. He's also my family. All right. This first poem of mine is dedicated to my mother. I always tell people that the best storyteller I know is Sonia Maldonado Ordorica. My mother was a teenage mom. She never got to go to university, even though she's one of the smartest people I know. My mother's dreams often are through her children, but my mother taught me the art of storytelling and how to keep a country on the other side of a border alive and a part of you. So this is to Sonia, mother in the community pool. Mother rests on an inflatable donut. Her fair skin deepens in the afternoon sun. She likes the water, is a water baby, but is of the desert. Mother ducks under the surface, chemical golden, hair floating like tentacles atop the glassy chlorinated plain, until all of her is submerged. Mother exists in all my stories, her dreams that never came to be, her words hidden inside me. I write her into metaphor, make her heroine, mermaid, a mortal being. Mother, she splashes me playfully before drying off to have a rest, lies recumbent in a plastic lounger, curls blades soft and shiny all around her. Mother. So yeah, both of my parents, all of my grandparents are originally from Mexico, and it really is through my grandparents that I feel a connection to the country. And sadly, I lost my grandfather at the start of last year from COVID. And I'm going to share two poems. This poem I wrote in the days after he passed away, of a memory when I went to Chihuahua for the first time, which is the state that my mom's family is from. If you know anything about Mexico, Chihuahua is very hot, it's the desert, and there's lots of cows. So it's not sort of what everyone thinks about. It's not Frida Kahlo's Mexico, but it is my Mexico. So this is for Papa, para mi abuelo. It was July, which in Chihuahua meant you could fry a huevo on the sidewalk. Copper crimson, my skin was an artifact of my motherland's history. You wore your sombrero, cowboy boots, the leather belt with silver repojado buckle. You were an alondra, belting out corridos from a time gone by, a Mexico that preceded me. Between your honeyed notes, warm timber, I found our definition of love. You showed me a different version of man, offered me a choice between tender and strength. Many called you oso, a tall bear with leathery skin and those beautiful green eyes, but to me you were Papa, the one who sang like Vicente Fernandez, but hugged like the Holy Father. Through the iron grill, on the other side of a window, I watched you while my cousins played in the dirt. You sang of victory and loss, of a love that stretched out like a telephone cable across all our homelands. In your words, I found myself, and so I hummed along. Love has no need for the cartographer because love has no borders. Love is not a planet, and so it can never be destroyed. Love has no expiration date, and so our love will always exist. Love is a songbird that flies many thousands of miles to find home in the heart of another. Eventually, there was applause for you, for me. As the sun set, the light hit the window pane, causing our two bodies to morph into one. At once, I was a man in the reflection, and you were a little boy singing. So, my next poem is dedicated to both of my grandmothers, my abuelas. This poem is also for anyone who is part of a diasporic community who grew up with that very unique experience of having family members that you were closely related to but didn't live near. And often it would happen on weekends where you get phone calls and your mother's forcing you to speak to aunties or grandparents and you're very uncomfortable about it and they're giving you that death stare and sort of whispering or mouthing to you that if you don't, they'll kill you. So this is that sensation of speaking to someone over a telephone. To my grandmother, this is Si Dios quiere. Abuela sits on the other side of a telephone line, sipping café from a Mickey Mouse mug. I'll see you in a month, Mama. Si Dios quiere, mijo, si Dios quiere. If God wants. They would want me to be obedient and chaste and ever faithful, to remember to say evening prayers and not eat meat on Lenten Fridays. But if God wants something particular of me, I think they would want me to be a rebozo threaded by an ancient needle, stretched out above memories that chase me. If God dreams, they would dream me as abuela pins clothes to a line under the mid-morning sun as heat rises off freshly scrubbed terracotta tiles. If God imagines, they would imagine me safely walking hand in hand, languidly under summer clouds as he whispers in my ear, Te amo. If God transforms, they would transform me into a brilliant butterfly, dancing freely over fresh flowers, roses, hyacinths, marigolds, sipping nectar in a drunken spring days. If God creates, they would create me, a map stretched out over mountains and seas, water blurring the hard ink lines of borders to carry me to places not yet traveled. ¿Estás aquí, mijo? Sí, Mama, I'm here. If God wants, they would want me to exist forever, so Abuela has someone always on the other side of an unbreakable line, waiting to greet her like a sun that never sets. Thank you. I'm going to do two more poems for this set. This one is a poem I wrote during my time with the Edwin Morgan Trust. I was really fortunate to get a grant through them to work on some new poetry during Morgan's centenary. I am in love with Edwin Morgan. I think that if our paths had crossed, that, you know, he could get it. Don't tell this to the old Scottish Guard. They're gonna be like, oh my God, what are you talking about? But I love Morgan. I love the way that he wrote about love and desire. I love that as a queer person, you can see yourself in his poetry. And yeah, to see queer love just written with such heart. So this is my homage to Morgan, and this is dedicated to my husband. This is Neroli Kiss. They say iron girders dyed the River Orange, the one we sailed down that Indian summer. My hand scooped up clementine water only to find it was me who was colored that apricot pink. And still I supped the mystic drink. While sailing down the river, my mind went with the current, and I turned to you full of wonder, sunstroked, open-mouthed to ask, do you ever stop to think how water might have linked our dual bodies? Coral springs, Venetian sea, salmon riverbeds, the Ganges, Rio Grande, the Don or Dee, or somewhere in between. My mind poured out like a broken dam, overflowing onto our afternoon. Do you ever dream about a life in which we never met, or wonder what would be had I not traversed the sea? I hope you never ask these questions. But you smiled and continued rowing towards something I did not know. I looked to the city's riverbank, watching couples promenade arm in arm, and thought of that day. Your lilted tongue, each turn a phrase, capturing my attention along the Thames. On the Clyde, I cupped my hands in holy consecration, offering you a drink. You turned to me, mischievous, and said, "They say iron girders once dyed the River Orange, but I understood it to be myth. Still, when I kissed your lips, a rusty Neroli aftertaste lingered on my tongue, and in your eyes I realized it was the sun that was our constant, the very thing we both orbited all those years until our final first kiss. There was a copper memory I left behind as we continued sailing down the Clyde. Perhaps I'll return to it in the future and find the blood orange taste awaiting me. From the banks, I might see two lovers sailing down the tangerine stream, and when I do, I'll wash in its blessed blossom lock and think of you." So this is my last poem for this set. This poem is also about my grandfather. When my grandfather passed away, I had to watch his funeral on a YouTube live stream, and it was a really weird sensation. I'm someone who grew up in the Catholic Church. I still very much identify as spiritual, and believe in sort of a higher power, and that our ancestors can visit us and they speak to us. I was not in a great place when it happened, truth be told. And my grandfather came to me in a dream a few weeks after he passed away. It was very nice to hear from him. So this is about that. Give me 1 second. Okie doke. This is mis raíces, which in Spanish means my roots. We are in the desert, lips cracked, mouth dried like freshly milled maíz. The ground sighs as if inconvenienced by each of our steps over its thirsty ochre. There are tall green nopales lined in neat rows, reminding me how even here abundance is possible. Grandfather asks me my thoughts of the land, so I ask him if this is where we come from. Sí, mijo, half of you is from this desert. I lick my lips, parched like the earth, take my boots off, then my dirty socks, stomp my feet to the beat of the jarabe tapatío, digging deeper into the soil with each kick. "What are you doing?" asks my grandfather. "I want to be a nopal, papa. I want to grow." So he leaves me, then returns with a shovel, carefully plants me into this weathered landscape. Afterward, he kisses me goodbye with such strength before patting my soft head, and in his touch I know I will be fine here. All will be fine. The desert is mine if I want it. Here I'll learn how to grow. And so my grandfather begins the return journey alone. The ground calls after him, but I stay quiet because I know I will be fine here. All will be fine. I am the true vine, and the desert is my gardener. It's mine to inherit because I am of both land and root. We're just gonna do a quick scene change. fun.
We are here. That was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So let's have a wee chat about this wonderful collection.
Let's do.
Thanks so much for letting me do that. It feels like such a huge honor.
Thank you for just sharing space and time. I'm very grateful.
So I thought we could start by talking about kind of starting with the collection itself, really, and in terms of how it came together and the book that it is now. So, I mean, I feel like there are so many poems that feel like raw, decisive moments in themselves in the collection, so that you pick up any poem and it kind of feels like a kind of pinnacle or like a center, as it were. So I just wondered, at which point did they start coming together as a collection? At which point did you feel like you started to see a narrative, I suppose?
Yeah, I think that I always knew that I wanted to explore this idea of someone attempting to find rootedness or belonging, and I wanted to start from childhood going into adulthood. But I think it was with conversations with different poets and who sort of really challenged me to think about not the individual poems, but like how you can take a collection of poems and build a narrative. So you can almost do, what a prose writer is doing in a novel, but you can do that with individual poems. So I think as I started to really home in on this idea of wanting to explore rootedness, a lot of the poems had already existed or were kind of obviously like, oh, they're going to go into the collection. But again, it was just different mentors, different poets who really helped me to think, to be a bit braver about what stories I chose, and to sort of challenge me that if I felt comfortable and confident enough to really get to like the rawness. And it's funny, I didn't realize how vulnerable and open this collection was until it's gone out and people have told me that. And I was like, yeah, it's been this really heady experience of like, oh my God, like I've shared a lot of stuff, you can't take that back. But it's exciting. I think for me, telling these stories about queerness, about a diasporic experience, sort of confronting racism and homophobia and xenophobia and queerphobia are not things you can do lightly. And so for me, the vulnerability, I guess, was always necessary, and I'm just sort of starting to awaken to the fact that that's what happened.
I mean, you mentioned the individual poems, and I'm sort of curious to know, and also the mentors and the what other people have kind of taught you. Was there anything that surprised you about your own work once you saw it sitting in a collection, once they were in a particular order? Did you learn anything new about the poems themselves?
Yeah, I think just how present like maternal or matriarchal figures are in my poetry, which, I think maybe is something that happens a lot to like gay men, and we just don't want to fall into the stereotype that we'll always talk about our mothers. Yeah, I think for me, like I said, as I introduced my mother's poem, my mom was the original storyteller. And so I think it's very obvious that she is so present in so much. And a lot of, and her father is a through line as well, my papa, my grandfather Filomeno. And so I think that surprised me. And I think also, yeah, I think what was surprising too was, I did play with form, and I think I've always been really afraid to sort of talk about, like, I don't feel confident when people want to say the word poetic. So, like, I don't know what poetics are, but I'm like, I feel confident in what I've done, and I now realize in retrospect that I have played with form. There are certain poems that are very obvious in conversation that I was consciously doing something in conversation with other poet, or say, a poetic idea. But I think it's been really neat to have this realization of like, okay, you can play around with form and you'll survive. And you can still articulate yourself how you want to. Don't be afraid to kind of experiment. Yeah.
That sounds like a really nice realization. It's like a really positive one. So let's talk a wee bit about the different kinds of belonging in the book. There's this stanza that just really struck me in one of the poems, and I've written it down. Where is it? I longed to know a land like that, close enough to feel at home, which was one of the lines that really was like, oh, gut punch. Because I think it says so much about migrant experience, actually, as well. And I was just sitting there thinking about that with the last poem, one of the last poems that you read, because they kind of speak to each other. So there's something in that line, that says, to know a land like that, which kind of implies not like this. So I wonder, in your experience and with writing the poems, what kind of knowledge of land comes from migrating?
I think this idea that you can build community, and this is not to say like the immigrant experience is easy in any way, but that it is possible to find home. And I think that really does marry with the idea or my experience of queerness and this idea of sort of found families, that if you don't feel rooted in one place, and if you don't have that experience of growing up in one continuous country, or if you feel that experience doesn't fully speak to your being, so thinking more in terms of sort of sexuality or your understanding of gender, if it doesn't relate to these things that are forced upon us from the get-go, that it is possible to find home elsewhere. And I think, but this has been a learned experience, from growing up in a very unique way of sort of moving around every few years, and then meeting my husband and going through the UK immigration system and really understanding why it's called the hostile environment and just how difficult it is to navigate that. But I think where the collection ends and sort of choosing the last poem, Mis Raíces, is kind of laying claim to my version of rootedness and sort of saying, this is okay. Like, it doesn't have to, you may have grown up sort of idolizing that version of what it means to relate to a home, but this one is still as valuable.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful, and I just found it incredibly moving. You mentioned there the found families and belonging to a community, and one of the things that I think is so beautiful about your poems is that actually longing for place and longing for landscape, actually, in many ways, and longing for particular people, they sort of go in and out of each other, and they're very much related. So I wondered, in poetry, how does longing and belonging, so kind of desire and safety, how are they connected for you?
Yeah, I think there's obviously very desirous poems, and that can mean very different things in the collection. Sometimes it's about sort of sexual, carnal desire, but a lot of times I think there is sort of this manic obsession for, the opening poem is very much that of like wanting to lay claim to a community or to a country, just someone. The speaker in the poem is so desperately listing off all these very disparate groups, like goth bottoms and unironic Aerosmith fans, but then all of these countries that I've lived in and all of these indigenous tribes that are the original inhabitants of many of those countries, and just kind of desperately seeking this. I think where they marry is kind of towards the latter half of the collection. There's one poem in there called Ceremony, which is dedicated to the Writers of Color group that's led by Hannah Lavery, and I think that is an actual embodiment of people as home, is sort of finding oneself in that community, in that sense of understanding what is it to share space with other people who understand the diaspora, who understand that their roots as difficult as it is to sort of interrogate our tie to like colonialism, to inherit this trauma, you know, in my experience, to know that one's family is both the colonizer and the colonized, and these kinds of ideas, and to have that space with people to talk about these things very openly has taught me the importance of community as home. And then I think maybe that's where I am more interested in right now at this time of my life, and I like that you picked up on that, is like that people can be home. So irrespective of the country and what may be going on in that country, or that you can work collectively to fight that country, because maybe the community is based there with the people, but the country is hostile. The country is not inviting. The country has issues that need to be interrogated, but the people there are your first place to lay the roots down.
Yeah, totally. And then like who gets to define what that country is, you know, absolutely. Let's talk a wee bit about language, because, yeah, I just have to. I just, reading the poems, I kind of found myself almost switching voices in my head between Spanish and English a lot of the time, which was really lovely. So I wondered, how is Spanish rooted in your writing? Like, how does it come in? How do you kind of handle that? What's your, and has it changed over the years?
Yeah, so I think for me, it comes a lot through sort of family being present in the poems and wanting to honor them in a way that feels right. So like for my grandparents, often if they're featured in the poetry, that's where Spanish will come in, or if I'm sort of dealing with ideas of family. Because ultimately for me, that is my connection to Mexico, is through them, through the stories they tell. You know, I didn't grow up in Mexico. I was born in the US and then lived a very transient life around the globe as sort of like a third culture kid because of my dad's job. But for me, Spanish is a way to root them and that family history into my poetry. And then now I am starting to write poetry more in Spanish. I'm not as confident. I don't think I can articulate myself fully as I want, but it is something I'm trying to explore more, to sort of say you do have a right to that mother tongue as well, and you can express yourself differently. Even just how a Latin-based language like Spanish works, just like with rhyming schemes, with that you can say a lot less in Spanish than in English, and it's very interesting to try that out. But for me, yeah, that is sort of the through line for Spanish. And then, you know, I think in other instances, not necessarily poems that are in this collection, but like playing with other language in different places. So I have written poems that use Doric, because my husband's family is from the Northeast, and my in-laws speak in Doric. And I find that really interesting, of like inheriting another tongue that is so different. Like I knew nothing about Scots dialect before, you know, marrying into a Scottish family. And so I think language is a very interesting way that you can play in poetry, and because of the economy of language and the conciseness that a lot of times happens in the poetic form, it is a very interesting place to play with language. And, you know, we heard from Carl earlier, and playing between English and Swedish, you know, and Etzali so brilliantly moving between Spanish and English. And I think poetry really does hold infinite possibilities with language.
Do you feel like, because you said that you know, feel less confident in Spanish, does it give you a kind of, now that you're trying it out, does it give you any liberties or freedoms that you don't have in English?
Yeah, so I would say the poems that I've written recently in Spanish are a lot more experimental. They're bonkers. They're less about me, which is nice, which is like really interesting, because this collection is entirely like about me, really. And often, you know, the speaker, it's written from the I voice, whereas in the Spanish poems that I've been writing, I'm not present, which is really liberating, because then it allows me to explore more. Like I've been really interested in the past few years to kind of play or explore nature poetry and kind of lean into that. I have a really good poetry pal who she asked me at the summer, once I set the final typeset of the collection off, she was like, Andres, what do you want to do like next? Like, not like you have to have like your next collection out or this or that. Like, what you as the writer, what do you want? And I said, I want to write more nature poetry. I really am keen to explore that. And so Spanish has been really interesting to kind of just lean into these different worlds. And yeah, I'm not thinking over psychologically about it, but now that I say that out loud, it's very interesting that by kind of going to one of my mother tongues, I have removed myself, but feel a lot freer in that.
Well, it's fascinating because you were talking about your mother and storytelling as well, because it's a different kind of storytelling. We are going to open it up to anyone who's got burning questions, but I just have one left that I have to ask. Because you were saying about kind of leaning into other worlds, there's so much joy in these poems, I find, and there is, I suppose, celebration is another word for it, and it's a celebration of self and of being yourself fully in safe spaces, and embracing your own queerness. And I wonder where and in whose work you find that kind of joy.
Yeah. Oh, I love this question. I have already said I am in love with Edwin Morgan. If an afterlife is possible, I'll see you there. Who are other writers? A poet who I am obsessed with, who I think is, when you say like find yourself, is how she explores this idea of being part of like this diaspora and not being, and like language being a barrier to access, is Nina Minha Pals. And her poetry collection, Magnolia, I just like freaked out while I was reading it. Just, how we can lose parts of ourselves in this desperation as you're getting older and you know that your grandparents are dying. And if you don't learn that mother tongue fluently, like just all the things you miss out on. And I think that I felt really seen in a lot of ways in that collection. Danae Smith, and a collection that I recently read, Joelle Taylor's Canto, is brilliant. How she, again, like, has just really shown me what you can do with poetry. A collection that weaves theater making, that reads as a play text, is really brilliant. Other poets, Hannah Lavery is a huge mentor of mine. A lot of these poems were written in workshops led by her. She does so much great work for writers of color in Scotland. She's our Edinburgh Macker. She has her own collection coming out. You need to support her. And I don't want to be cheesy. I don't like calling people out, but Nadine, who is with us, her collection, let me tell you this, is brilliant. It speaks, I like to think that our collections are speaking to each other. Nadine's collection really showed me what it means to empower oneself, and like even the title, something declarative to say like, I'm going to tell you this. I don't think I was as, that is like a very punchy collection. Mine, I think I'm a bit more timid. So I like to say like, there's the qualifier at the start. Like, I'm gonna tell you it, but this is at least this I know. I'm not saying I know everything, so don't try to quote me on how to solve the world. That's not going to happen. But yes, I think those are poets who are just doing such interesting, important things, weaving activism in their work, sort of interrogating homophobia, gender-based violence, racism, but also allowing joy. And I think that's something I've really learned, and I hope for the readers, that's where the collection ends, is that you're allowed joy as well. You can be angry. Anger is a very good tool. It's a very good emotion. But also joy is so powerful to say, you know what? This is what it means to live a fully realized life, and you can't take that from me.
That's amazing. We might have some of those collections here today. I'm not sure. Maybe. Let's open it up. Does anyone have any questions about the collection, about Andres's work in general? I think we might not need a roaming mic. Do we have a roaming mic? No. I repeat the question. That's what happens. So do raise your hand if you've got a question. I have many questions, but I thought I would share the stage a wee bit. That's such a great question. I'm just going to repeat that before you answer. So about being a migrant or being part of a diaspora or the child of migrants, that sometimes there's this concern that you're almost kind of borrowing a culture that's not really yours. And whereas if that's something that you felt, or if the poems are a way to access your kind of Mexican identity. I think that was...
That's a brilliant question. I think that is something, that I'm always very conscious of, because I don't want... I think I'm always very careful about how I let other people speak about my experience, and I don't want my poetry to be speaking for experiences that aren't real. So I'm always very clear, like with interviews and whatnot. My parents were both born in the US. I'm not the son of immigrants, because I think that's a very different experience. My mom's stories of growing up, my grandparents, those who are still alive, have been in the US for over 50 years now, and their English is not great. So my mom growing up, as an 8-year-old, was having to go to the bank with them when they're taking out loans and be the translator. That is not my experience. And so I'm always very careful about how, or I hope I'm very careful about how I'm articulating that identity and that experience. So when I write about Mexico, if me in the poem is physically there, it's only places that I've been, So I've never been to where my dad's family is from, which is in Guadalajara, which is more south than my mom's family. Because I feel like that would not be true, and I would be making it up, I've seen photos of it, but it doesn't feel true to me. And so, for my family, one side will be like, oh, we're not really in these poems, and that would probably be my answer. But I do write about my grandparents, but I write about them in poetry, my dad's family, and they're always memories in the US, and I couch it very specifically. I think it is something to be very aware of, because, again, I don't want to I don't want to speak to experience that is not mine. So even when I talk about immigration, I'm coming from it, going through the UK and then the EU. I lived in Ireland as well, so going through those immigration systems, not as going through the US. But I think it's something to be important of. I try to always be aware, that the privilege that comes with, I would, in America, identify as a second-generation American. And that's very different to what it would be like to grow up with your parents who don't have the access to language, who can't articulate themselves in a way. And what does that feel like as a child to have to be an adult in those situations? So thank you for that question.
That was an amazing question. Do we have any other questions at all? Do speak up. If you've, do raise your hand and interrupt me, because I've got one final question otherwise. Just to kind of finish off. You mentioned the title towards the end, and I know we were talking a few weeks ago about the title. Yes. And about how it has that really nice contradiction in it, or not contradiction, but it has like a nice I guess, window to uncertainty.
Yes.
I suppose, because it's like, at least this I know, but it also points towards everything that I don't know. So my question is, writing the collection, did it give you any new questions? What kind of uncertainty did it leave you with?
Ooh, wow.
That might be a really difficult question.
I think for me, it's opened up the possibility that I might choose home somewhere else in a few years, and that's okay. I think for me, I think we are sort of changeable human beings, to quote, not in like a full way, but the great Hannah Lavery, who always tells me, you can ask me about this opinion, but if I change my mind in 2 weeks, you know, I'm allowed to. And I think there's something very brilliant about that as we get older, that we are changeable people. You know, the more sort of radical spaces that I interact with, and I'm able to sort of increase my consciousness about issues, different friends that I've met in my life that teach me about different experiences that may not be my own. So I hope that the title leaves room to grow. And I like to say to people that, you know, the follow-up collection, who knows what I'll lay claim to knowing then, but I like that open possibility. Let there be a follow-up. And I like that because we're always experiencing new things. I always want to be challenging myself. I don't want to be static. I want to be open to new possibilities. I want to be open to more joy, to more anger. I want to, also as a poet, I want to be open to more poetic forms. I want to challenge myself. So this collection, I think, is very temporal. For me, it is like an archive. It's like a memoir of this time and space. And so I guess what I know from it is that there is a lot to continue to learn about the world, and that knowledge can grow and develop, and it will, and I hope it does.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. Huge round of applause. We're going to hear some... We're just going to move our chairs, and then we'll hear a final set of poems, which is very exciting.
Is this the right height? I think that works. We're gonna say it works. All right. So if the first half of this event was about family, the second half is about queerness and sex. So this first poem is one that I wrote with the Edwin Morgan Trust. And I hope it speaks in conversation with poems of Morgan's like Strawberries or, his sort of sexier poems. This poem is Amor. I am going to nurture him like a nopal, make him grow pretty flowers, but remove his spiny needles. Until he stands tall, until he is fully formed, until I can hold him close. Then I will gather him, take his flower and his fruit, and burn it all until our love is something new. Transform it into tequila, mezcal, until our love is sotol, pulque, thick, racia, crystal clear. Like the drink, our love will be pure, will burn our tongues and throats, will bring the blues in the morning. This poem, does every poet have one in their back pocket? Who knows? This is a poem about losing my virginity. Just say what's on the tin. This is called Losing Myself. I waited next to the neon lights, written in brushstroke kanji, tap, tap on the window pane, clouded in humid condensation, but still your smile shone through the opaque glass. I opened my door, closed my door, followed you across the street. Taquero, like te quiero, I love you. It's how you introduced yourself. You told me to undress. I did not fight your commands. You proceeded to wash my body, scrub soap between my legs, studied the shape of my round bottom, told me what you planned to do to it. Your tongue explored me, and I longed to know its taste. You filled my body with all of you, taught me how two bodies move as one. I wondered if it were possible to break a body in this way. When I left your place, I could not be certain I was the same. I opened my door, closed my door, rolled down the window to defog the car. I looked up at the neon sign and drew in the air, let it fill my body, exhaling as both the old me and the one about to drive away. This poem was written during another pandemic. I don't know if you know this about human history, but these seem to be happening quite a lot. This poem was written during the height of swine flu, and it's based on a real story when I fell in love with someone on a plane. And it's a love that never came to be, but every so often I think of this person, and I thought it was such an interesting story. It deserved to be a poem. So this is Newark Liberty International Airport. In a departure lounge in the state of New Jersey, the least beautiful one, that's where I first saw you. You were older than me with beautiful blue eyes lined with circles like a trunk of sequoia. Your name, Adam, meaning to be red, meaning to make, made from dirt. Like the first man, Adam, my first man, Adam, my man-made fantasy. While the plane taxied, you asked me questions of my travels to come while I made up our story, blurring our present and future with memories of your hands, tracing our timeline together, tracing the outline of our love. I dreamt of our first good morning as the sun rose above the Pacific, as the sun shone brightly on your face, as I imagined you kissing me. We'd talk between the midnight hours over a meal which I could not say was breakfast or dinner, but would be our first together. At the baggage carousel, I would bump into you, tired but still enamored, happy to see your familiar face. I would want to be braver, want to invite you to my room, want to feel your hands span the time zones of my body. But I'd simply say goodbye as you kissed me on the cheek and wished me well, waving me off into the ether. You see, I once met an Adam seated next to me on a plane, introduced myself to him, did nothing to become his Eve. So this is my penultimate poem. And yes, this has just been such a pleasure to spend time with you. So this is the last poem I'm gonna read in the collection, and then I'm gonna share something new. This poem is very much about desire and is one of my favorite in the collection because I think it's one that really experiments with form, which is something I'm learning to be braver about. and it was written during an amazing workshop with the poet Rachel Long on the art of desire. So this is 8 synonyms for vermilion. 1. Vermilion is the strong clavicle of that man at the gym, whose gray eyes watch me while in front of the mirror, convex, flipped inside his dirty mind. His taut chest and razor clam collarbone peeking out of his dirty vest. He stands there, imagining what it would be to spot me as I squat deeper into the pain of the weight I shoulder, imagining what it would be to go to its source. 2. Vermilion is a sweaty drag bar at the corner of Zarzamora and Congress, where I wait to be picked up by a stranger, plucked like the desert flower that I am, thirsty but elegant, ready to be sniffed and then discarded along the highway. 3. It is the color of sashimi and flavor profile of umami, salt of lip, dunked in sodium, raw. 4. It is red-orange Speedos that fit tightly around brown copper quads and muscular bums, with turquoise wet dripping off shaven legs, ready to dive deep inside. 5. It is men from Seville who fuck apathetically, vigorously, languidly, and who take breaks to smoke fags. They call it a siesta, while texting people not currently present in our bed as I watch on naked. 6. Vermilion, a metallic heat like a conductor of electricity, the pigment of childhood, my favorite crayon in the box. 7. It is candles burning in the aisles of TK Maxx, wasting time and smelling indiscriminately, searching for a bargain. I am the Goldilocks of scent and color. 8. It is fire, or perhaps it is desire, which is not a type of flame you can simply strike with a match. It slowly burns until it destroys everything in its way. So, this is my last poem for the evening. It has been a great honor to spend time with you. Thank you for choosing to celebrate with me on this wintry Wednesday. Often, when you have a new body of work out there, people's well-meaning questions are, what's next? I don't know what's next, but as a poet who is always writing new poems, I can tell you that this poem that I'm about to share with you is where I hope my career goes, and I hope I really home into that bravery and a very specific type of queerness. This poem was written in a workshop with the amazing Joelle Taylor. It will be published soon with Wasafiri, and I'm very honored that it will be read by more people. It's a praise poem. It's written to my very specific experience of queerness. It is for young Latinx men, little boys who become men, growing up in a culture that doesn't always feel welcoming. And this is to say, I see you and I celebrate you. In the name of the Joto, Mariposa, y Maricón, I offer this prayer up in the name of the Joto, limp-wristed mariposa, y irreverent maricón, the ones who saw bravado like the Spanish Inquisition, a machismo that could smell testosterone, death dropping off the scale, ready to kill us. I bear witness to the little boy swaying hips like whirlpool washing machines while dreaming in sequins, leotard, red lipstick, diamante-encrusted bustier, imagining us as our own leyendas, Madre Divina, anything for Selena, anything for us. My incantation of cumbias and merengues will summon memories of watching our parents dance and studying not our fathers, but our mothers who art in heaven, longing to be held in that way, beautiful and vulnerable, spotlit, and telenovela pretty. I lift my hands up, blessing this Eucharist, the altar before us, divining the DJ to play one more Palina, Thalia, Shakira canción, porque under our abuela's eyes, we are safe. Ay, hijo, calmate, and leave him alone. He's just having a little fun as we shake our bitty bum bum while watching the clock, because when the clock strikes 1, then we're done and back to little boys we go. So worship with me. In this sacred moment, safe in this communion, let the música y ritmo protegirte, my little apostles. Praise the joyful color, luminous freedom as you repeat after me. We are holy faggots. Santos maricones, we are happy little boys having a little fun. We are staking claim in who we really are. Holy, holy, holy boys. We are beautiful. Telenovela pretty. We are our own leyendas. We are mariposas unfurling from our crisalidas. We are holy, holy, holy. We are whole. Amen.